What's meant in the Bible when it suggests that the world will be destroyed by fire in the last days? Today we're going to talk about that, and you'll be amazed at what we've discovered. And with us again, by invitation, Brent Miller. And Brent, thanks for coming back.
Thank you.
We did a previous program with you talking about the flood from a very detailed perspective. And at the end of the last program, we were sort of comparing the beginning of the Bible with the end of the Bible, where there's destruction by water in one way, destruction by fire at the other end, and you suggested that there is a kind of a symmetry there.
Yeah, there definitely is a symmetry behind the destruction of the world, well, the pouring out of God's wrath, starting with the first trumpet and the days of creation. If you look at the days 4, 5, and 6 of creation, they correspond with the first, second, and third trumpets in Revelation chapter 8. Let's take the fourth day of creation. At the end of the third day, remember days start at night. Plants don't grow at night. The evening and the morning were the first day. So at the end of the third day, the grass and the herbs are to grow. Well, those would be visible on the fourth day. So the first judgment is against the grass and the herbs. It's against the earth. The first judgment of the trumpet, first trumpet sound, is 1/3 of the trees and the grass would be burnt up on earth, 1/3. Mm-hmm. The fourth, as you'll notice, the fifth day of creation, God creates the living things in the seas. The fish and everything in the seas. Well, the second judgment, the second trumpet, is against 1/3 of all the living things in the seas. The sixth day of creation, not talking about man, he creates all the creepy, crawly things and all the land mammals, everything that lives and moves on the land. The third judgment, the third trumpet sounding for the wrath of God in Revelation, is against the creepy, crawly things and the mammals, in so much so that the third of all the fresh water is poisoned. Of course, man would probably avoid that, but living animals, mammals, and creepy crawly things can't avoid that. So by consequence, 1/3 of them are dead. So you have a direct parallel. So there is an order by God, not only for the creation, but literally the systematic removal of that creation during the wrath of God.
By the way, I might add at this point, and we're going to be talking about this later, that Brent Miller is a co-producer of Decoding the Future, which is a very detailed and thorough study of the book of Revelation. 7 DVDs, 10 hours of teaching in here on every aspect of the book of Revelation that you can possibly imagine, including beautifully filmed trips to the locations of the 7 churches of Asia Minor. Other aspects of the fulfillment of Revelation are presented in very beautiful graphic form. It's just phenomenal. And having said that, establishing you as somebody who really loves to study the book of Revelation, let's talk about those judgments now, the trumpet judgments. And let's talk specifically about today, the day in which we are actually sitting here and filming this. There are people watching. There are people somewhat alarmed about what they're seeing in the heavens that sort of correspond with some of the things that are talked about in Revelation. Let's talk about those things.
Right. Thank you. When Jesus was being asked about the signs of his coming, his answer in one case was almost a matter of rebuking the people who were asking him. You didn't know the day of my visitation, almost as if you should know. We now know in retrospect that it was made very clear so many years after the decree for the rebuilding of the temple. So, consequently, if in the scriptures he tells us when his first coming is, why wouldn't he tell us the second coming? He gives us signs for the first coming, which most people ignored, over 200 of them. There are many, many signs for the second coming. Most prophecy experts focus on world events, but as you said, there are celestial events as well. In fact, one of the things Christ said is that the heavens would be shaken as a fig tree, an untimely fig tree, losing its figs as the winds shake it. So let's look toward the heaven from that regard. We should see precursor events in the heavens for his coming, just like we see precursor events right now here on earth, both religiously, politically, economically, and socially, happening on earth. So let's turn our attention to the heavens. But before we do that, I want to talk about the governments of the world, because they see something that the general public typically does not see. In the last few years, the governments of the world have been collecting and storing seeds, and they're doing it at neck-breaking speeds. Massive seed vaults are appearing all over the planet. The most famous one was in Norway, where they took an ice island 600 feet off the ocean floor, dug right into granite, and have a massive seed vault, basically in cold storage. Now, and it's protected, by the way, with armed guards 24/7. Now, everybody takes notice of that, but they don't realize that there are now over 1,000 seed vaults just in the last 5 years that were created by governments of the world. Why the rush to create them now? Second thing we're seeing is that governments of the world, as you mentioned earlier, Russia, United States, and various other countries are building underground, not bunkers, but cities, small cities out of rock under the ground. For what purpose? NORAD announced just this year that they were transporting, at an incredible cost to the taxpayer, a lot of high-tech military equipment into the Cheyenne Mountains to, and I quote, to protect it from the possibility of a natural EMP pulse. What could be natural? So we'll get into what could cause a natural EMP pulse. In other words, they're preparing for something.
An electromagnetic pulse,
Yes.
of such proportions that it actually could kill things. It certainly could wipe out electronics and electrical equipment.
Right.
Turning us back to the Stone Age, basically. You lose your electricity, you've just lost everything we have in society today. Everything from sea phones to toasters and all stops in between, and suddenly quit if there's an electromagnetic pulse. And you're saying, well, they're putting these things far underground to protect them from that perceived happening. Now, as you were talking, I was thinking maybe they're doing this to prepare for a nuclear war, going underground to protect themselves from radiation. But their reasoning seems to be more on a natural basis than a man-made basis.
And I actually think when they released that article saying that they were doing this to preserve electronic equipment from a natural EMP pulse source, I think it actually was a mistake. I don't believe they intended to tell the public that. One of our greatest fears in wartime is, we've all heard the scenario of an EMP, a nuclear weapon being detonated above the United States, shutting down our power grid. Effectively, that is not actually accurate. The EMP pulse from a nuclear explosion will shut down a 500-mile radius. You need several of them for the power grid of the United States. It would still shut us down, essentially, but it wouldn't shut down the whole planet. A natural EMP pulse would shut down the entire planet. In fact, depending on how strong it would not only shut down all the power grids on the planet, kill all communications, destroy the alternators in your car, just blow them up, so that nothing moves that's motorized. The satellites in orbit would be rendered ineffective. All of our communications would be down, essentially. And it would be decades before we'd bring it back up. Now, if this event happens, what is the scenario through the rest of Revelation would actually talk about events that do not have electricity or technology associated with them. And we find it very interesting that in the end, with the Battle of Armageddon, they arrive on horses and chariots, and basically by landmass, there's no missiles, there's no airplanes flying. They all converge in the Valley of Megiddo. You know, they're coming the old-fashioned way. 2,000 years ago, the armies are converging to do battle.
Well, you know, you have in Revelation, Revelation 6:15, the leaders of the earth are taking emergency action. It says in the kings of the earth, and the great men, the rich men, the chief captains, the mighty men, every bondman, every freeman, hid themselves in the dens and in the rocks of the mountains. Well, you could just put in there Cheyenne Mountain for one place, because that's what they're doing. I mean, this is a matter of record. But then comes this verse, immediately following it, and said to the mountains and rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him that sitteth on the throne, from the wrath of the Lamb, for the great day of his wrath is come, and who shall be able to stand? So some people will actually know that this is a judgment of God. Probably most people won't. But some may remember what they were hearing from Christians, and they may say, uh-oh, what the Christians were saying was actually true. And here it is. Now take it from there. Let's talk about the judgments and what they describe, particularly the seal judgments, the trumpet judgments.
Okay. Let's start with the seals. So we'll back up a little. We'll start with the first seal. We see a white rider riding on a horse with a bow and no arrows. It's always been interpreted by most theologians that this is indeed the Antichrist. And it very well could be the Antichrist, but it's more than that. Let's step back and look at what Christ said when he asked, what will be the events of your coming? What did he say? He said, first thing out of his mouth, make sure that nobody deceives you. That's the rider on the white horse. Religious deception. Christians will be deceived and not follow after Christ. The second thing, there will be wars and rumors of war. The second seal. The next thing, there will be famines. That's the third seal.
Yes, it is.
The next thing that Christ said was the fourth seal, pestilence, which is the fourth seal. We both skip over the fifth seal because there's a space and silence in heaven for a half an hour. And the last thing Jesus says is there'll be signs and wonders in heaven. Sixth seal, where you have signs and wonders in heaven.
Yes.
So Jesus himself was actually quoting the first, seals 1 through 4 plus seal 6. But he described the first seal as religious deception. You know, the rider on the white horse. Now, most Christians believe my faith is strong, I follow the Bible, I can't be deceived. And I won't be deceived. However, let's think about it for a bit. How many Christians today believe in evolution? It's over 30%.
Yeah.
How many Christians believe that we, and those who believe in evolution, how many believe that we were seeded by aliens from another planet? Remember, we're talking about Christians.
Yes, and a lot do.
Yes, well over 50% of them. In fact, what I was just quoting was the United States stats. Christians in the rest of the world, the percentages are much, much greater. Is that not deception?
Yes, certainly.
So their first thing is do not be deceived. Now, the reason I think the deception is going to be so great, and we won't dwell on this, I just wanted to make one comment, is when the Antichrist comes, he will be able to do signs and wonders. Those two Greek words, signs and wonders, are specifically powers of God himself. Christ performed miracles using those same two root Greek words. The description is the same. For some reason, God gives Lucifer literally his power so that when he deceives the world, he produces signs and wonders proving to somebody that he is God. So if the deception is that great to convince people, Christians, that he is God, how do you know that he's not? He can perform miracles. It's very simple. If you don't see Christ coming back in the clouds and you're raptured, that's not God. That is a counterfeit. But we're getting beyond ourselves.
Okay, having gone through the seals, let's go now to the seventh seal, which when it is opened, it unleashes a group of trumpets, trumpets 1 through 7. which take us into the judgments that I really want to talk about today, because you've got I think, some very unique and original thinking here.
Thank you. As you mentioned earlier, Noah, during Noah's flood, God presented a rainbow, a covenant that he would never again destroy the world by a flood. And later we find out that he would destroy the world by fire. So these judgments, you would expect, naturally, if the wrath of God has come, you would expect the earth to be destroyed by fire. We mentioned the first three judgments against the land, against the ocean, and against the living things by poisoning the waters on the earth, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, but we didn't say how. They are all by fire. Let me read the first trumpet, if you don't mind. Revelation 8:7. The first angel sounded, and there followed hail and fire mingled with blood, and they were cast upon the earth, and a third part of the trees was burnt up, and all the green grass was burnt up.
So
the word all is significant.
Fire from heaven.
Fire from heaven.
Now, this is something we don't see. This is like, we think of it as supernatural, but could it be natural?
It could be very natural. In fact, when God created the heavens and the earth, he made it very clear. On the sixth day, he rested. He set everything in motion. Let me give you a quick example. Suppose an asteroid hits the earth. Did God grab that asteroid and throw it to earth? No. He intended for it to hit it. He set that asteroid in motion when he created the heavens and the earth that long ago. So everything, essentially, unrepentant man who does not know God will see everything as a natural cause and effect. So to them, it is a natural effect, but God set it in motion at the creation of the world. So what did he send in motion? Let's look at this verse more carefully. The source, the nearest source, is the sun, plasma from the sun, which is what the scientists are starting to theorize is going to happen from the sun. It's going to generate a CME burst, coronal mass ejection, which means a chunk of the surface of the sun itself, not X-ray emissions, is going to blast off the sun and hit the earth. Now, if that were to happen, it would have a viscous, liquidy type of feel at 6,000 degrees. Minimum 6,000, some estimate up to 10,000, by the time it comes to the Earth's atmosphere. With a pressure wave moving through the atmosphere, you now introduce the minus 150 degrees from outer space just outside our atmosphere to the stratosphere, which is saturated with moisture, instantly crystallizing all the moisture in the upper atmosphere. As the pressure wave moves through it, it compacts that ice into hail and ice. Now, so here's what we see. And there followed hail and fire mingled with blood. Where's the blood? As it moves through the atmosphere, at any given moment in the United States, there are about 54,000 airplanes flying in the air. They all have aluminum skins. The skins vaporize at about 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit. Remember, we're at 6,000 minimum. We have vaporized all the planes and all the people in the planes and every bird and insect in the air. There's your mingled with blood. Now it continues on its way and it hits the earth. Third part of the trees were burnt up and all the green grass. The key part here for me is all the green grass. A liquid would flow on the ground and go into every crevice and destroy
You're talking
everything.
about a plasma.
Plasma.
This ejection from the sun would be,
Yes.
It's not gas, but it's a state of matter called plasma,
Fourth state.
which is very dense and very hot, and it would be like liquid. You've called it liquid fire, which is absolutely horrifying to me to think about that.
Yeah.
But when it comes, it would literally hit the earth with an impact and
Right.
spread out.
It would spread out, and hence all the green grass was burned up. In John's vernacular, this one sentence is a perfect description of a CME blast hitting the earth. Now, we mentioned earlier that the governments of the world know something that we don't know, right?
Sure.
2 years ago or 3 years ago, they suddenly, all the governments immediately started creating seed vaults. They started escalating the building of underground bunkers in cities, and at the same time started putting stuff into caves. For instance, the United States just announced that NORAD is collecting all of this and putting it back in the Cheyenne Mountains. What did they see? We now know what they saw. Last year in July, NASA announced that 2 years prior, January of 2012, there was a CME blast that came out of the sun. A CME blast that literally would have wiped out all life on Earth. Far more intense than what this shows. The blast missed Earth by 3 weeks. It was actually 3 weeks behind Earth. It shot past Earth. If Earth was 3 weeks back in its orbit, we wouldn't be here today. But of course that can't happen because God doesn't want that to happen. Question is, why did God show us that blast? He's giving us signs in the heavens. He's telling us what's happening.
And we now have the capability of seeing those signs.
We see that. They have a satellite system that can see those.
Hang on just a minute right there, and we'll rejoin that idea. Right now, I want to mention our upcoming magazine. This is the Prophecy Watcher, and we are going to have articles on Bible prophecy monthly in this magazine. And there'll be articles written by men like Brent Miller, Tom Horn, L.A. Marzulli, Avi Lipkin, Ken Johnson, Bill Salas. Bill Koenig's going to be writing on European politics, and many, many more. Of course, I'll have articles in the magazine. And from now until August 31st, you can purchase a charter subscription. For your gift of $100 to Prophecy Watchers, you'll have a lifetime, that's lifetime charter subscription. And this offer expires August 31st. We're looking very much forward to publishing this magazine and to including articles by men like Brent Miller and others, men who are on the cutting edge of thinking about Bible prophecy. Let's go ahead now and continue, because this is intriguing to me. Going through the trumpet judgments here, they're fiery judgments.
They are fiery judgments.
And it's not like unknown fire. It's fire that we can actually see today using scientific instrumentation.
Right, and the governments of the world are looking at it. The people are basically ignorant of it because the information that's being released from the governments and the space agencies that have the satellites is far and few in between. But when they release it, then we know in retrospect afterward what it is they were seeing and why they were probably acting in the way they are. For example, the European Space Agency has a satellite network system called SWARM. SWARM monitors the magnetic fields of the Earth. And a year ago, in 2014, they announced that the Earth's magnetic field is starting to collapse. It is getting thinner and accelerating its collapse at 10 times the rate their worst projections had indicated. It is the magnetic field of the Earth that protects the planet from solar emissions. If it wasn't for the magnetic field of the Earth, the solar winds would vaporize our planet in just a matter of years. So with this magnetic field becoming weaker, and we now see that the sun is generating more X-class emission flares than it ever has been, and it is now shooting off CME blasts in random locations spherically. Now this is starting to make more sense. It's basically saying one of these will hit us. But that opens up and begs a question. 1/3 of the land mass, no matter how you read it in the original language, 1/3 of the land mass is vaporized by fire from this mass. The question is, which third? Let's take it seriously and get right down to, hard tacks. Which third? Revelation talks about the remaining 2/3 of land masses on this planet after this event. It talks about Russia, China, the kings of the East. It talks about Ethiopia, Africa. It talks about Europe. It talks about the Middle East. We know it's not that third. What's left? North and South America, which is approximately 1/3 of the land mass. So that includes the 850 million plus people on those land masses.
So the world is going to be basically recrafted in the day of the Lord.
Yes.
All of the Earth's tilt, the solar radiation, flooding, plate tectonics, everything is going to be juggled around in preparation for the kingdom age.
Yeah. For all intensive purposes, people who are non-believers on this earth will truly believe this is the end of the world, there is no more, because these events will happen in very quick succession. The pole shift, as we talked about in the last time I was here with you, just happens at the beginning of the sixth seal, and now we have the fiery judgments. The second one happens almost immediately after the first one. Let me go ahead and read that. And the second angel sounded, and there was a great mountain burning with fire and was cast into the sea. And the third part of the ocean of the sea became as blood, and the third part of the creatures within the sea, which were in the sea that had life, died. The first theory, the one that is most proliferated, is that it's an asteroid that hits the ocean. Well, there's a lot of problems with that theory. First of all, asteroids aren't shaped like great mountains. It's a great mountain. Secondly, they're not burning in space. Third, if an asteroid that big hit the Earth, it would actually crack the Earth in half and destroy most all life on Earth. That's not the event that is occurring. It says, there is a great mountain cast into the sea with fire. It's still burning after it's in the sea, and it kills all 1/3 of the sea life. If you look at it from a scientific viewpoint, the only thing that makes sense, again, mankind will see it as a natural event, is a supervolcano under the ocean. A massive volcano is cast into the sea from under the ocean. A supervolcano which spews lava, fire. The ash and the lava pollute the ocean, 1/3 of the ocean, killing 1/3 of all the sea life, doesn't affect the rest of the planet.
It's coming, and we are out of time. But I need to take time to tell you about what I consider to be the best study on Revelation that you can possibly purchase. This is called Decoding the Future, and it is the most thorough study on the book of Revelation, but it's also the most clear presentation of Revelation I've ever seen. You will be thrilled when you just go through this thing. You simply won't be able to stop watching. 7 DVDs, 10 hours, lectures, places around the world have been filmed. Historic sites, archaeological sites have been filmed. It's just, the production values on this are absolutely first class. It's yours for $149.95. Again, 7 DVDs, 10 hours of lectures and travel videos. And by the way, with this, we're going to give you a free copy of the Final Prophecies. Also co-produced by Brent Miller, and I consider it to be one of the best, if you will, thumbnail travel guides of Bible prophecy ever produced. So, Decoding the Future, either in Blu-ray or DVD format, along with the Final Prophecies, the whole package, yours for $149.95. And all you have to do is check the online bookstore, and you'll find the offer right there. We're down to practically no time at all, but I want to thank you for joining us. What you did present was very, very thought-provoking. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Gary.
Brent Miller, we need to talk to him again. I'm Gary Stearman. Hey, keep watching. We are. Thanks for joining us on Prophecy Watchers. You can find us on the web at prophecywatchers.com. Follow us at facebook.com/prophecywatchers. In the meantime, keep watching, everybody, and we'll see you soon.